Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled The Guardian of Renewal, a Journey Through Seasons and Stories. Eloan's eyes fluttered open to the soft, golden glow of dawn filtering through gauzy linen curtains. Outside, the first chorus of morning songbirds greeted the day with joyous trills, as though the entire forest had conspired overnight to prepare the perfect symphony. For a moment she lay still, savoring the lingering warmth of her quilted blanket and the faint scent of lavender that drifted on the breeze. It was the kind of spring morning legends were made of, when every blade of grass seemed to hold a secret, and each passing cloud promised new wonders. With a gentle stretch, Eloan rose from her bed and padded across the cool wooden floorboards of her cottage. She pulled back the heavy oak shutters, and an exhilarating rush of air swept in, carrying with it the delicate perfume of wild hyacinths, basil, and the faint, heady tang of rain still clinging to the earth. Beyond the small flower boxes lining her window, the rolling hills shimmered in emerald hues, dotted with clusters of primrose and bluebells. Somewhere in the distance, a brook chuckled over smooth stones, urging her to greet the morning. She slipped into a comfortable linen dress dyed a soft shade of misty blue, its skirt embroidered with tiny silver threads that caught the light like dew on cobwebs. As she tied her dark hair back with a ribbon of pale green, she noticed a curious thing, a single, silvery feather resting on the wooden sill. It was unlike any feather she had seen before, long and slender, iridescent in the dawn light, as though plucked from the wing of some mythical creature. She held it up between her fingers, marveling at the subtle patterns that shimmered along its barbs. A sudden rustle behind her drew Eloan's gaze toward the doorway. A narrow beam of sunlight sliced through the cottage, illuminating a small, wax-sealed envelope lying on the threshold. The seal bore an unfamiliar insignia, a spiral of vines encircling a single, open eye. Her heart quickened as she picked it up and broke the soft crimson wax with a careful thumb. Inside, a sheet of pale parchment was folded into thirds and tied with a twist of emerald cord. Eloan's fingertips tingled as she undid the cord and unfolded the parchment to reveal elegant script in midnight blue ink. My dearest friend, when the awakening breeze stirs feather and flower alike, it is time for you to remember your gift. Seek me at the glade where moonlight dances on stone, and the great oak stands watch. There, the first test awaits. A. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. The gift mentioned felt like a distant memory tugging at her mind, visions of wandering lights in the forest, of shapes shifting at the edge of her vision, and of an inexplicable bond with the natural world. Who was A, and what test awaited her in that moonlit glade? Though her cottage sat at the forest's edge, she had rarely ventured deeper than the sun-dappled meadow. Yet something inside her stirred a blend of excitement and resolve that set her pulse racing. Before she could ponder further, a gentle thump at the window drew her attention. Peering out, she saw a small fox with fur like spun silver, its bright amber eyes reflecting curiosity rather than fear. The creature cocked its head, then slipped away into the awakening woods, its tail brushing over the vibrant wildflowers as though beckoning her to follow. Eloan pressed her palm to the glass, a silent promise forming in her heart. She would answer this call, whatever it might bring. After a quick breakfast of fresh baked bread, honey, and warmed spring milk, Eloan gathered her provisions, a satchel containing a simple map of the surrounding forest paths, a small flask of herbal tea, and the mysterious feather, which she felt compelled to keep close. She strapped on her worn leather boots and stepped outside, inhaling deeply the heady fragrance of earth and blossom. Every sense seemed heightened: the soft chirp of crickets, the distant rumble of waterfalls, the cool brush of dew-kissed grass beneath her feet. As she crossed the smooth stones of her garden path, a shaft of sunlight broke through the trees, illuminating floating motes of pollen that danced like golden sprites. The breeze whispered around her, as if sharing secrets, a promise of adventure, a hint of danger, and the thrill of discovery. Eloan adjusted the ribbon in her hair and set her gaze toward the dense tree line, where ancient oaks and silver birches stood sentinel. Beyond them lay the glade, rumored among villagers to be enchanted by moonlight and mystery. Each step took her farther from the safety of her cottage and deeper into a realm where magic still lingered in every rustling leaf and shadowed clearing. The crystalline waters of the brook flashed at her side, urging her onward, and the song of unseen thrushes wove a tapestry of sound that guided her path. At one point, she paused to cup her hands under a trickle of water cascading from a moss-covered ledge. The coolness awakened every fiber of her being and steeled her resolve. She was no longer just a dreamer in a quiet village, she was becoming something more. Moments later, she came upon a circle of standing stones, half hidden by ferns and ivy. Moonlight, lingering stubbornly in twilight, still shimmered faintly upon their surfaces, etching luminescent patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Eloan's breath caught in wonder as she recognized this as the glade described in the letter. The great oak she had read about stood in the center, its ancient limbs cradling the sky and its roots delving deep into the earth's secrets. She approached the tree with reverent steps, her heart pounding. The forest fell silent, as though holding its breath. Gently, she placed the silvery feather at the base of the oak, then knelt to rest her palm against the rough bark. A subtle warmth radiated from the wood, traveling up her arm and settling in her chest. In that instant, memories flashed behind her closed eyes: childhood afternoons spent chasing fireflies, late-night conversations with a mysterious mentor whose face she could no longer recall, and the flutter of magic awakening in her veins. As she opened her eyes, the glade returned to life. Tiny lights like motes of stardust twirled around her, illuminating the feather and etching a path toward a hollow in the oak's trunk. There, carved in living wood, was the next clue, a riddle that glowed softly in moonlit letters. Only the heart that listens can hear the song of the unseen. Speak the truth you hold within, and the path will reveal itself. Eloan swallowed, feeling both exhilarated and apprehensive. She drew in a steadying breath, recalling the promise of compassion and courage she had made her whole life. With quiet determination, she whispered, "I am Eloan of Windvale, and I seek to protect the gentle magic of spring." At her words, the glade exhaled 1,000 shimmering whispers, and the hollow in the oak slowly parted like twin doors. Beyond, A narrow passage beckoned, lit by the glow of bioluminescent moss and the soft heartbeat of the earth itself. Eloan rose to her feet, her spirit alight with purpose. The first test had passed, but her true journey was only beginning. And so, as dawn broke fully over the horizon and the birds resumed their cheerful chorus, Eloan stepped forward into the hidden depths of the forest, guided by the awakening breeze and the promise of adventures yet to come. When Eloan crossed the threshold of the ancient oak's hollow, the air grew cool and fragrant with the scent of damp earth and glowing moss. The passage beyond was narrow, carved by hands long forgotten, its walls pulsing faintly with an inner light like the heartbeat of the forest itself. Each step she took echoed softly, multiplied into a chorus of whispers that seemed to carry distant laughter, muted sighs, and the hushed rustle of wings. It felt as if the world outside had fallen away, leaving only this living corridor of wood and memory. She paused to brush a slender fingertip across one of the luminous glyphs etched into the trunk's interior. The symbol glowed brighter at her touch, an intertwined spiral and leaf reminding her of the seal on the letter that had summoned her here. It hummed beneath her skin, a resonant note that stirred something deep in her chest. Eloan closed her eyes for a moment and listened, not the frantic rustle of treetops or the tinkling laughter of brooks, but a single, clear pulse like a distant drum calling her onward. Pressing forward, she followed the curve of the tunnel until it opened into a vast chamber, the ceiling arching high above like the vault of a cathedral. Thousands of specks of bioluminescent moss traced intricate patterns on the walls, painting constellations of green and violet across the rough-hewn wood. In the center stood a shallow pool of water so still it mirrored the ceiling perfectly, giving the impression of an inverted sky. On its surface floated translucent petals white with iridescent edges arranged in a perfect circle around a solitary, thornless rose of deepest crimson. Eloan's breath caught. She remembered the riddle, only the heart that listens can hear the song of the unseen. Speak the truth you hold within, and the path will reveal itself. The rose, glowing faintly against the dark water, must be the object of this test. As she stepped closer, the petals began to drift apart, forming a swirling ring that opened like a gate. Yet a voice soft, musical, yet tinged with longing filled the chamber. Why do you seek the power that sleeps in shadow and flame? It asked. The question seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Eloan swallowed hard. She felt the warmth in her chest flare, as though answering would set her very soul alight. Carefully, she knelt by the pool's edge and placed her hand over her heart. I seek not power for myself, she said, her voice steady despite the chamber's hush. I seek to protect the fragile hope that grows in every bloom, to guard the gentle magic of renewal, and to share light where darkness gathers. She paused, letting her words echo. If that is what you mean by power, then I claim it to stand as a shield for the innocent, and a beacon for those who have lost their way. At her last word, the petals in the pool lifted as if caught in a silent wind, and the crimson rose sank slowly beneath the surface. The water rippled outward in concentric circles of silver light. A narrow beam of that light shot upward, illuminating a hidden doorway carved into the far wall. Beside it, the glyph of the spiral leaf transformed into the image of a soaring hawk, wings outstretched. Then walk the hawk's path, the voice intoned, and let your resolve light your way. Eloan rose, heart pounding with exhilaration. She took a deep breath of the cool, moss-scented air and stepped toward the newly revealed door. As she pressed her palm against the carved symbol, the door swung open silently, revealing a twisting stairway of living wood. Each step glowed softly under her boots, inviting her upward into the unknown. At the top, she emerged onto a narrow ledge carved into the oak's trunk, high above the chamber beneath. Through an opening in the gnarled branches, she could glimpse the realm beyond, a canopy of emerald leaves, silver moonlight filtering through in shifting patterns. Far in the distance, the silhouette of distant mountains glowed faintly against the night sky. Yet between her and that vista, the path wound upward in a spiral of living bark, lined by glowing fungi and intricate root carvings that pulsed with subtle energy. As she ascended, each footfall resonated in her bones, syncing with the heartbeat she had felt before in the chamber. Memories stirred in her mind, the first time she had felt inexplicable empathy for a wounded songbird as a child, or the night she believed she heard the trees whisper her name. She realized now that those moments had been seeds, gifts she was meant to remember when her true journey began. Halfway up, she paused at a fork in the path. To the left, a narrow branch arched toward a cluster of glowing lantern-like blossoms. To the right, a steeper climb led into a tunnel of twisting roots, where the pulsing lights dimmed into deep blues and purples. Both paths called to different parts of her heart, one promising gentle illumination, the other shadowed mysteries. She closed her eyes and listened to the subtle currents around her, the gentle hum of life in the blossoms, or the quiet whisper of secrets in the darker tunnel. After a moment's thought, she stepped toward the shadowed root arch. She sensed that courage was required now, courage to venture into places unseen, to confront what lurked beyond the comfort of light. With steady resolve, she slipped beneath the arch, the glowing roots closing softly behind her. The tunnel narrowed quickly, the air growing warm and fragrant with a heady mix of earth and spice. Drips of sap fell in soft patters, and the walls twisted even tighter until she had to turn sideways to squeeze through. At last, she emerged into a circular grove beneath the oak, where shafts of moonlight fell on a small cluster of ancient stones. In their center lay a low stone altar, atop which rested a simple wooden box bound with copper filigree. The box's lid bore another glyph, a stylized hawk's eye, half closed in slumber. As Eloan approached, the box seemed to pulse with a gentle warmth. Kneeling, she unclasped the filigree latch, and the lid opened to reveal a single object, a crystalline orb filled with swirling golden mist. It floated a hair's breadth above the velvet lining, emitting a soft glow that cast dancing patterns on her face. She stretched out a trembling hand. The moment her fingers brushed the orb's surface, a surge of warmth bloomed through her, filling her with a sense of unity with every living thing she had ever known. In that instant, she heard the forest's memory, the sap rising in spring, the first song of fledgling birds, the slow dance of roots reaching through dark soil. It was a song of life's endless renewal, the very power she had vowed to protect. With reverent care, Eloan lifted the orb and cradled it against her heart. The grove around her seemed to sigh in relief, and a final whisper drifted through the branches, "Bearer of dawn's light, your path is now enlightened. Carry this gift with compassion, for the forest's legacy depends upon your courage." As she made her way back down the spiral path, orb secured in her satchel, Eloan felt the awakening breeze swirl through the canopy above. The trial of shadows had tested her resolve, and she had emerged not only unbroken but empowered. Ahead lay new challenges, wilder mysteries, deeper tests, but for the first time she understood the true meaning of her gift. And with heart and spirit aligned, she would face whatever awaited in the depths of the enchanted wood. Eloan emerged from the hollow of the great oak and found herself on a narrow plank bridge of living wood that arched over a chasm shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Below, phosphorescent mushrooms clustered at the base of ancient roots, casting soft pulses of green light that danced like will-o'-the-wisps in the gloom. Above her, the canopy closed in, branches twisting into shapes that whispered of hidden faces and watching eyes. She tightened her grip on her satchel, feeling the orb's warmth against her ribs, and stepped forward. Every footfall in Emberwood seemed to echo with purpose, as though the forest itself guided her. She trusted the orb's gentle glow. Its swirling golden mist now behaved like liquid sunlight, ebbing and flowing in response to her heartbeat. The path led deeper into the heart of the wood, where no ordinary traveler ventured. Tall trunks soared into darkness, their bark etched with spirals and leaves that matched the spiral leaf glyph from the oak. The air was heavy with the scent of damp moss, sweet resin, and something else, smoke and ember. Soon the trees thinned, revealing a circular clearing dominated by a colossal, charred stump at its center. Blackened roots curled outward like the spokes of a wheel, and at the heart of the stump glowed a pocket of smoldering embers. A pale mist drifted from the embers, carrying sparks that glittered in the dim light. This was the Emberwood's furnace heart, set to burn with the first flame of creation, hidden away to test those who would steward both gentle growth and fierce passion. Eloan approached with reverence. The orb in her bag pulsed brighter, and the air before the stump shimmered as if parted by heat. As she knelt on the bare earth, the embers flickered into life. A soft voice, like the sigh of wind through leaves at dusk, spoke from the embers themselves. "Child of spring and dawn, do you carry the fire of hope within your breast? Speak the truth, and prove your worth." Eloan closed her eyes and let her thoughts drift to her village in Windvale. Rows of neat stone cottages roofed with tile, tended gardens bursting with tulips and rosemary, and neighbors greeting each other with warmth. She thought of her grandmother's stories of how spring's fires kindle life in the coldest hearts, and she felt that same warmth swell within her. "I bear the fire of hope," she said softly, choosing words that resonated with her soul. "I carry light to kindle courage where despair gathers. I will tend the blaze of compassion so that it never consumes but always enlightens." At her declaration, the embers roared, flaring into a circle of pale orange fire that wreathed the stump. From the blaze stepped a figure clothed in dancing flames, a spirit of Emberwood, neither wholly solid nor purely flame, with eyes like molten gold and hair that flickered like willow-wreathed tongues. It regarded her with an inscrutable expression. "You speak with conviction," it said, voice crackling like dry leaves. "But words alone are wind. Show me your heart's resolve by walking through the fire gate. Beyond lies the well of cinders, where a single spark may become an inferno or die to ash. Bring back a shard of living coal, unbroken, and you will prove your stewardship of flame." The spirit swept an arm toward a ring of flame that now licked upward to form an arch. Eloan swallowed but did not hesitate. She retrieved a small iron brazier from her satchel, a gift from her mentor years ago, and placed it carefully at the arch's threshold. Drawing a deep breath, she stepped through the fire gate, feeling heat swirl around her like a living cloak. The embers glowed white-hot as she entered a cavern of molten light. Inside, the walls pulsed with veins of glowing magma, shedding light that cast sinuous shadows. The floor was smooth basalt, warmed but not burning beneath her boots. At the chamber's center stood the well of cinders, a basin of black stone filled with coals that danced like captured starlight. Each ember glowed with an inner pulse, and the air smelled of deep earth and ancient fires. Eloan placed her hand on the edge of the brazier, feeling its cool metal before she dipped it toward the shallow glow of coals. But as the brazier neared, the coals hissed and shifted. One ember leapt into the air, crackling, and hovered before her eyes, tiny sparks revolving like fireflies. It spoke with a voice like distant thunder, "Why should I follow your hand rather than burn free into the ether?" Its tone was challenging, as if demanding allegiance rather than obedience. Eloan steadied her voice. "Because I seek to share your light, not to claim yourself as my servant. Without guidance, fire may consume all it touches. I vow to carry your warmth to hearts grown cold, to temper passion with wisdom, and to honor the spark in every soul." She offered both words and the calm steadiness of her gaze. The ember hovered a moment longer, sparks drifting like golden petals, then gently sank into the brazier. The chamber trembled softly, and ribbons of smoky mist curled around Eloan's ankles as if in approval. She withdrew the brazier, careful not to spill a single glowing shard. The ember glowed steadily within, a beacon of living coal that would not falter. Exiting through the fire gate, Eloan stepped back into the clearing. The emberwood spirit nodded, its form flickering with pride. "You have proven your worth. Take this shard and temper it with compassion. The world beyond thirsts for both warmth and restraint." Eloan bowed deeply, accepting the brazier. As she lifted her head, she felt a new strength settling in her veins, a steady, unwavering flame that would guide her through darkness. She placed the brazier gently on the charred stump, where it settled into a niche forged by roots. The shard of living coal lay nestled within, humming softly. The spirit spoke once more, "Go now, bearer of dawn's flame. The trials of water and air await to test your adaptability and grace. Seek the mirror lake and listen for the moon's reflection." With that, the spirit dissipated into embers that drifted skyward like flecks of copper. The forest seemed to exhale, and the path behind Eloan glowed faintly, beckoning her onward. Slipping the orb and the brazier into her satchel, she turned toward the east, where faint silver light glimmered through the trees. Every step she took felt measured and assured. She carried both the emberwood's gift and the promise of her vow. Ahead lay Mirror Lake, a place of still water that would challenge her to reflect truthfully on her own heart. But for now, she moved with confidence, the soft roar of embers echoing in her mind and the forest alive with newfound respect for the one who would safeguard both spring's gentle breaths and Emberwood's fierce fire. Eloan left Emberwood's trial of flame behind her, the living coal's steady glow secured safely in her satchel beside the awakening orb. As she stepped beneath the boughs, the forest seemed to breathe around her, branches parting gently in acknowledgement. The path wound eastward, slender roots weaving a natural corridor that guided her steps. Each footfall stirred motes of pollen that drifted in the pale moonlight, like flecks of silver dust dancing at the edge of vision. After what felt like an hour of tranquil walking, the air changed, growing cool and mist-laden. The scent of wood and fire yielded to something crisper and aquatic freshness that carried faint echoes of rippling water. Ahead, through a curtain of weeping willows, Eloan glimpsed the shore of Mirror Lake. The water lay perfectly still, as smooth and dark as polished onyx, reflecting the sky and trees with uncanny precision. It was said that whoever gazed into these depths would see not only the world around them but the hidden truths within their own heart. Approaching the water's edge, Eloan paused to prepare herself. She unrolled a length of braided silver cord from her satchel and tied it around her waist, its other end coiled loosely for her to hold. The orb hummed softly, and the ember in its brazier flickered in silent solidarity. She knelt to fill a small flask with the lake's surface water, marveling at how the liquid seemed darker at the bottom and luminous at the rim, like captured moonlight. A voice, breathy and echoing, drifted from the lake's still surface, bearer of dawn's light and flame's keeper. Do you dare to look upon your own reflection and claim what is revealed? The water's surface quivered, and images rippled across it, visions of her childhood, her grandmother's kindly face, the first time she had felt magic stir within her. Then, briefly, she saw herself wreathed in darkness, shoulders stooped as despair weighed her down. Her own eyes in the reflection were wide with fear. Eloan's heart pounded. She remembered the riddle from the oak: only the heart that listens can hear the song of the unseen. Now the unseen parts of herself called out. She took a steadying breath and spoke aloud, I acknowledge both the strength and the fear within me. I will not turn away from my own shadow, for in understanding it, I bring balance and compassion to others. With those words, she folded her cloak, tied it about her waist, and stood at the lake's brink. The willows parted as if in invitation, revealing a shallow inlet lined with smooth stones. Eloan set her satchel on a flat rock and waded in, holding the silver cord in one hand. The water was cool against her ankles, then her knees, rising to her waist with every step. The orb and ember lights glowed through the water, guiding her deeper. The moon overhead trembled in its reflection, casting rippled beams that danced across her face. Several yards from shore, the lake floor dropped away to a hidden basin. Eloan anchored the cord around a sturdy root, then closed her eyes and dove. As she sank, the water enveloped her in silent darkness, broken only by the orb's soft glow through the surface. Bubbles of her breath rose like tiny lanterns drifting upward, and she felt the hush of the lake cradle her. At the bottom lay a large, smooth stone plinth, carved with the glyph of a teardrop encircled by waves. Resting atop it was the tear of clarity, a single, flawless droplet of water suspended as if frozen in midair. Eloan reached out, her fingertips grazing its surface. In that moment, visions flooded her mind, every moment of doubt she had silenced, every fear she had buried, every sorrow she had refused to feel. The lake's memory pressed upon her, the pain of others she had healed, the unspoken grief she had seen but not acknowledged. A whisper echoed, "Will you carry the weight of truth and pain, so others may be free? Will you let your compassion flow like water, cleansing but never drowning?" Eloan's chest tightened, but she remembered the warmth of the forge and the promise she made by the oak. She drew a slow breath, letting the water fill her lungs, then exhaled inwardly, reclaiming each burden as part of her strength. "I accept every tear and every joy as threads of life's tapestry," she murmured. "I will be both watershed and refuge." As her words faded, the tear of clarity trembled and gently rose into her cupped hands. The weight of it was heavier than any stone, but also comforting, as though it held the distilled essence of compassion itself. She placed it carefully into a small leather pouch lined with silver thread, then untied the cord and signaled her assent. Breaking the surface with a gasp of air, Eloan felt the lake exhale around her. The moonlight reflected in the water no longer wavered, it lay clear and true. She waded ashore, the tear of clarity secured close to her heart. The willow branches swayed, and the voice spoke once more, "Walk now with the clarity of water. Seek the vault of winds, where the final trial awaits." Eloan retrieved her satchel and adjusted its straps. The orb and ember flared in greeting, as if proud of her triumph. She looked across the lake at a narrow channel where mist rolled in gentle waves. That was the path to the Vault of Winds, hidden among the highest branches of the ancient forest's tallest trees. With steady steps, she turned away from Mirror Lake and followed a moss-carpeted trail that led into the depths of the woods. Each breath she took now felt lighter, as though every exhalation carried away shadow and fear. The tear of clarity pulsed softly in its pouch, a reminder that truth both joyous and painful could guide and sustain her. As the willows faded behind her and the trees thickened once more, Eloan felt her spirit buoyed by newfound resolve. The forest around her seemed reborn, leaves whispering secrets of wind and sky. Ahead lay the final trial, where she would need to prove her grace in the face of tempest. But for this moment, she walked in peace, her heart clear as still water, her purpose unwavering. Eloan stepped into the swirling mist that marked the entrance to the Vault of Winds, her heart steady and her senses alert. The path sloped upward now, nestled between twin trunks of an ancient white oak whose branches arched high overhead, forming a natural tunnel through which the moonlight sifted like pale ribbons. Every breath she drew tasted of fresh ozone and distant storms, and the air in her lungs felt charged with electric promise. In her satchel, the awakening orb pulsed gently, the ember glowed steadily, and the tear of clarity lay warm against her side. Here, the final trial awaited, one that would demand grace in the face of tempest. As she ascended the earthen ramp, the wind began to stir. At first it was a gentle sigh, rustling leaves like the softest lullaby. Then it swelled into a playful whisper, teasing strands of her hair and tugging at the hem of her cloak. She smiled to feel its caress, recalling how spring breezes had once teased the curtains of her cottage window on dawns long past. But beyond the tunnel of oaks, the wind's voice shifted, growing stronger, more insistent, as though testing her resolve. She emerged onto a wide platform of woven branches high in the canopy, where mighty roots coiled like sleeping serpents beneath her feet. In the center stood the vault itself, a circular archway carved from living wood, its surface etched with runes that writhed and shifted as they caught the moonlight. Beyond the arch lay a vast chamber open to the sky, its far wall lost in darkness. Layers of hanging vines and moss formed curtain-like boundaries, and through these curtains gusts of air roared in turbulent patterns. A voice, clear and resonant like a clarion call, echoed from the vaulted chamber, bearer of the triune gifts: dawn's light, ember's flame, tears' clarity. Do you stand unbowed before the wind's ordeal? Will you carry the breath of hope to every corner of the world, and bend without breaking in the face of storm? The runes along the arch glowed silver, and a column of wind coalesced at its center, forming into a robed figure whose clasped hands whirled small whirlwinds like living lanterns. Eloan took a deep breath, recalling every trial she had faced, the cavern of light where she proved the strength of her promises, the fiery forge where she tempered her compassion, the mirrors, waters that taught her the power of vulnerability. Now the wind tested her balance. She stepped forward and answered, her voice unwavering, I will carry every breath of hope and every silent prayer on the wings of the world. I will bend like a reed in the gale, but I will not break. At her words, the wind spirit swept its arms wide, and the platform shuddered as a torrent of air tore through, swirling leaves and petals into a dancing cyclone. Eloan braced herself, legs apart, cloak and hair whipped into a maelstrom around her. The spirit's voice rang clear amid the roar, then prove your grace. Pass through the triad of storm's gust, tempest, and eternal gale and return here, bearing a fragment of each wind's essence. Only then will the vault open. A shimmering barrier materialized before her, shimmered like heat haze, and then fractured into three veils of wind, the first pale and whistling, the second dark and crackling with distant thunder, and the third a spiraling vortex of silvery mist that roiled endlessly. Eloan inhaled deeply, clutching the leather pouch that held the tear of clarity. She stepped forward into the first veil. The gust tested her steadiness. Currents barbed with sudden knocks and sideways pushes tried to shove her from her path. Even so, she pressed on, folding herself low to the wind, planting her boots firmly, and guiding her cloak over one shoulder to reduce drag. As she moved, she extended a hand and whispered, I accept your playful folly, gentle wind. I move with you, not against. The gust responded by lifting a feather from her satchel, the silvery feather she had found that first dawn, and carried it in a graceful arc back to her palm. It glowed with soft pale light, the essence of gale. She tucked it into her satchel and pressed on. Next came the tempest. Dark clouds of wind roared ahead, carrying electric malice that crackled through the air. Lightning flickered along the swirling currents, illuminating the world in jagged flashes. Eloan's teeth chattered on each blast, but she recalled her trial in Emberwood, how she had offered respect rather than domination to the living coal. Now she bowed deep, arms outstretched outward, embracing the storm's power rather than resisting it. I honor your ferocity, untamed spirit, she called. May your strength be tempered by compassion. The tempest paused, its thunderous voice grumbling like an old drum, then left behind a single strand of lightning-scorched leaf, crackling with electric energy. Eloan retrieved it reverently, the essence of thunder. The final veil, the eternal gale, was a swirling column of silvery mist. It spun endlessly in a funnel-shaped dance, drawing in motes of moonlight and dust. To pass through it, Eloan knew she must find its calm center. She closed her eyes and listened not to the roar, but to the heart of the wind, a steady pulsing, like a lullaby that had carried her to sleep as a child. Tuning herself to that pulse, she stepped forward with measured grace, following the rhythm in her bones rather than the chaos at her ears. The mist parted before her, guiding her to a still core where the air felt neither strong nor weak, but perfectly balanced. There, she reached out and plucked a single droplet of condensed wind, translucent and humming with quiet power, the essence of breath. As she emerged from the final veil, all three essences safe in her satchel, the archway of the vault blazed with silver light. The wind spirit smiled, though whether it was playful or proud, she could not tell. Its form dissolved into a shimmering cascade of motes that drifted upward into the night sky. The chamber itself opened like petals unfurling. A vault beyond the hanging vines revealed polished wood walls carved with scenes of seasons turning and elements dancing together. At its heart rested a low pedestal of living wood, atop which waited a delicate silver circlet woven with three motifs: a hawk in flight, a flame in repose, and a teardrop holding the stillness of a lake. Eloan approached and found tears in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of profound gratitude. She carefully placed the three essences, the feather, the leaf, and the droplet, into the circlet's loops. As each found its place, silver runes along the metal glowed and then faded, and the circlet balanced itself on her brow without effort. Instantly, a warmth spread from her head down to her heart, and she felt the forest's essence entwine with her own. The awakening orb glowed brightly for a moment, then dimmed to a soft, contented pulse. The vault spoke for the final time, its tone triumphant and serene: "Bearer of the aerial crown, you have proven your stewardship of light, flame, water, and wind. You are now guardian of renewal. Go forth and share your gifts, for the world awaits the dawn you carry." Eloan gently lifted the circlet from her head and placed it in her satchel beside the orb, the ember, and the tear of clarity. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the hush of the canopy, and let it out in a sigh that felt like a benediction. Outside the vault, the forest lay hushed in moonlight, as though waiting for her next word. She stepped onto the plank bridge once more, renewed and resolute, prepared to carry hope on each breeze, to carry light into dark places, and to let her compassion flow like rivers of spring. With steady steps, Eloan descended the ramp toward home, the three trials behind her but their lessons forever within her bones. The world awaited her return, and she would greet it with an open heart, a clear mind, and the gift of the guardian's vow. Eloan's path led her down from the vault of winds, each step lighter than the last, as though the forest itself bore her forward. The awakening orb nestled against her heart, the emberwood shard tucked safely beside it, and the tear of clarity and aerial essences in her satchel shared gentle pulses of power. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in pale ribbons, and the breeze, now friendly and soft, whispered encouragement in her ear. Beyond the forest's edge lay Windvale, her childhood home, and she felt a surge of anticipation. Her trials were complete, and now she must share the gifts of light, flame, water, and wind to heal the land she loved. She emerged into a misty dawn where fields of once vibrant wildflowers lay bruised by an unseasonal frost, their colors dulled and petals bent. The brook that usually ran clear and bright babbled weakly through its stony bed. Eloan knelt at the water's edge and uncorked the tear of clarity. Gently, she poured the silvery droplet into the brook. The water caught the morning light and flared with renewed brilliance, rushing forward with joyful vigor. Pebbles sang beneath its currents, and within moments, the stream brimmed full and clear, carrying life-giving water across thirsty fields. From the pond's new flow, she gathered a small handful of its rippling spray and carried it to the blossom beds. Holding the emberwood brazier aloft, she caught a single ember and set it carefully among the roots of a drooping patch of hyacinths. The ember glowed warmly, its heat coaxing the earth to awaken. One by one, buds unfurled in quiet bursts of violet and gold, as if the flowers themselves were inhaling hope. Eloan circled the garden, planting ember shards deep in the soil, and wherever she placed one, green tendrils pushed through the dark earth in eager shoots. As the sun rose, she climbed the gentle knoll overlooking the village. There, stone cottages stood silent beneath frost-crusted roofs, their windows dim with early morning chill. She drew the awakening orb from her robes. The golden mist within coalesced and spread outward in a warm glow that suffused the roofs, thawing ice into droplets that fell like blessing-laden tears. Windows brightened, shutters creaked open, and soft lights flickered to life inside. Villagers emerged from their homes rubbing sleepy eyes, astonished to feel the warmth on their cheeks and see color return to the world. Eloan raised a hand in greeting. "I have carried the forest's gifts to you," she called out. "Light for new beginnings, flame to kindle your passions, water to heal your sorrows, and wind to carry your hopes." Curious, the villagers gathered around as she passed the orb from one home to the next, each family receiving a gentle pulse of golden radiance. In response, laughter and song rose up, weaving through the streets like a joyous breeze. At the village square, Eloan paused beneath the old oak where she had first dreamed of adventure. She lifted the orb high, and the four essences, the radiant orb, glowing ember, crystalline tear, and silvery wind token, flared in harmony. A wind-carved bench near the oak sprouted vines of honeysuckle, and a once barren fountain bubbled alive, water dancing over sculpted stone. Children danced in the spray, and elders nodded in serene satisfaction as they tasted the cool, sweet water. With her mission fulfilled, Eloan allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The village thrummed with life reborn, gardens bloomed in riotous color, hearth fires burned bright, streams gurgled with laughter, and every window framed a scene of comfort. She felt the weight of her trials lift, replaced by a gentle peace that radiated through her very bones. The forest's voice, carried on rising breezes, thanked her for upholding its covenant, that magic granted must always be used to nurture, never to dominate. As midday sun peeked over distant hills, Eloan tucked the artifacts back into her satchel. "My work here is done," she whispered, "but the world beyond awaits its own renewal." Gathering the villagers, she taught them simple rituals: to scatter ember fragments at dawn, to offer tear water to wounded animals, to let the orb's light guide them through dark times, and to listen to the wind's counsel in moments of doubt. They vowed to become stewards of the land themselves, passing the knowledge to future generations. When goodbyes were said and the path called her onward, Eloan walked away with the forest at her back and Windvale bursting behind her in vibrant life. Each step carried the promise of new horizons, distant kingdoms in need of healing, forgotten ruins to awaken, lives to touch with hope. And as she vanished into the whispering trees, a final breeze reached her, soft as a lullaby. Go forth, guardian of renewal. Let every place you bless bloom in spring's eternal promise. Eloan left Windvale's blooming meadows behind and followed a winding trade road that led southward, where the land lay parched beneath an unrelenting sun. The awakening orb, now dim to a gentle glow, sat in her satchel beside the remaining essences. Each step carried her farther from familiar comforts and closer to a new challenge, Sunvale Downs, a once fertile region now gripped by drought so severe that entire villages sank into dust-choked despair. By mid-morning, she crested a low ridge and beheld the downs stretched before her in a golden haze. Cracked earth formed intricate, spider-web patterns wherever rain had become a distant memory. Scattered clumps of brown thistle and brittle grass bowed their heads to the wind, and a thin stream that had once threaded through the valley lay reduced to a line of stagnant pools. In the distance, the ruined spires of the old citadel Sunsta Hollow rose like fractured bones against the horizon, its stone walls crumbling into the thirsty fields. Eloan's heart tightened at the sight. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling each trial and every lesson, compassion tempered by courage, renewal born of reverence. She retrieved the emberwood shard from its brazier and held it out, murmuring a prayer to the land itself, "Grant me but a spark of your resilience." The ember flickered in response, sending a warmth beneath her palm that seemed to seep into the scorched ground. She knelt at the edge of the largest crack and pressed the ember gently into a fissure, closing her eyes to listen to the land's sigh. For a moment, nothing happened, then a tremor rippled outward, and green shoots thrust upward, splitting the dry crust in defiance of the drought. Around her, the valley held its breath as tufts of bright green grass unfurled like banners of hope. The wounded soil drank the ember's heat, and distant fields shimmered as if awakening from a nightmare. Eloan rose, heart brimming with cautious optimism, and beckoned the first travelers she spotted from the road. A pair of weary farmers, their faces etched with lines of worry, approached as though drawn by an invisible beacon. She greeted them with a smile. "My name is Eloan," she said, offering them water from the flask she had filled at Mirror Lake. "I have come to help. This land thirsts for renewal, and together we can coax it back to life." The farmers exchanged uncertain glances, then knelt beside her. They carried clay jugs that she refilled with tear of clarity, infused water, urging them to walk the new sprouts and pour the silvery droplets at their roots. As they worked, Eloan taught them how to scatter tiny ember shards at dawn, small pieces of coal that would offer warmth to latent seeds beneath the surface. While they labored, she climbed the gentle slope toward Sunsta Hollow. The citadel's gates lay broken, iron rings rusted through, and wild vines crept through gaps in the walls. Yet in the heart of the courtyard, a single well remained, its stones blackened by centuries of neglect. When Eloan gazed into its depths, all she saw was darkness. Drawing the awakening orb, she held it aloft and allowed its golden light to pour down the well. The orb's glow refracted against slick stones, illuminating moats of undrinkable water. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Let this well remember its purpose." A tremor shook the courtyard. The stagnant water churned, and discolored silt at the bottom began to clear. Slowly, pale streams of crystal water rose, dripping over ancient carvings, until the well brimmed once more. Eloan lowered the orb and leaned over to drink from the rim. Sweetness and cool relief flooded her throat, and she filled her flask again to share with nearby hamlets. Word of the revived well spread swiftly. Villagers emerged from their huts, drawn by the promise of living water. With each refill, she urged them to place a single drop of tear of clarity at their wells too, so every fountain, cistern, and rain catchment might reclaim its purity. By midday, fields that had cracked like shattered pottery now bristled with tender shoots. Birds once silent swooped down to dip their beaks in the newly flowing stream. Eloan paused on the citadel's highest broken parapet, surveying the transformation as a gentle breeze tousled her hair. Farmlands below shimmered in miniature, a patchwork quilt of renewed life. Smiles bloomed on faces that had known only hardship for seasons too long. But even as hope took root, Eloan could not ignore how swiftly the land absorbed her gifts. She realized that her power must be shared, not hoarded. She taught the farmers to fashion simple irrigation channels, to bless each seed with a drop of orb light, and to listen for the terrain's subtle shift signs of recovery and strain. She promised to return when the next season's sun bore down, for renewal was not a single moment but an ongoing covenant between guardian and land. As she prepared to depart, the farmers presented her with a woven garland of young wheat stalks, fresh from the revitalized soil, a token of gratitude and a reminder of their stewardship. Eloan accepted it with reverence, looping it around her satchel strap. She stood upon the parapet once more, gazing southward toward distant mountains where snow melt fed hidden valleys. The road stretched onward, illuminated by afternoon light that danced across the downs like a living tapestry. Gathering her implements, the emberwood brazier now empty of ember but full of possibility, the flask of tear water, and the awakening orb restored to its soft glow, Eloan set her gaze on the horizon. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in rose and gold, heralding the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In her heart, she carried both the memory of Windvale's renewal and the echo of Sunvale Down's rebirth. With steady steps and a buoyant spirit, Eloan descended into the valley, ready to bring spring's eternal promise to wherever darkness still lingered. The next land awaited, a forest's heart wounded by rot, a mountain's peak choked by storm, a desert longing for an oasis. Whatever lay beyond the next bend, she would face it with compassion sharpened by fire, clarity honed by water, and hope borne on the wind. Thus, the guardian of renewal pressed onward, a living bridge between Earth's ancient magic and the hearts of all who called it home. Eloan left Sunvale Downs behind and followed a narrow path northward into Blackroot Grove, a forest once renowned for its towering sentinel oaks, now groaning under a shadow of rot. The air was thick with the acrid scent of decay, and a sickly mist clung to every twisted branch. Beneath her boots, the moss-carpeted floor was slick with blackened sap, and the small stream that once sang through the grove now trickled sludge-brown through fungus-choked banks. She knelt at the stream's edge and uncorked the tear of clarity. Letting a single crystalline drop fall into the water, she watched as the liquid shimmered, the brown tint fading to crystal clear. Fish stunned by the previous pollution flickered back to life, darting beneath renewed ripples. Yet the forest's heart remained infected. Ancient trees stood skeletal, their bark split and leached of color. Pressing onward, Eloan came upon a circle of rotting oaks where a lone figure crouched. It was Bryn, a young warden of the grove, his axe long dulled by sap-borne toxins. He looked at her with hollowed eyes. "I tried to burn the blight away, but the flames only spread the spores," he admitted. Eloan nodded. From her satchel, she retrieved the emberwood shard cradled in its iron brazier. Holding it over the largest oak root, she murmured, "This fire heals, not consumes." Gently, she placed the ember among the fungal growth. The blaze flared pale blue, scorching away decayed bark and baking the spores without harming the living wood. The leached trunk seemed to inhale the warmth, its sap returning in faint rivulets of pale gold. Seeing hope, Bryn gripped her hand. Together, they traced the grove's veins. Ancient logging paths turned muddy trails, sprinkling tear water at every fork and embedding ember shards at each sickly tree. Slowly, the ground sprouted new green shoots, and the underbrush trembled back to life. Yet when Eloan raised the awakening orb, its golden mist struggled against the thick canopy of corrupted branches. She lifted it higher, willing its light through the leaves. Where the glow touched, dead limbs budded, and pale green leaves unfurled like shy blossoms. The forest exhaled. But pockets of spore-laden mist lingered. From her satchel she drew the silvery wind token and spoke the ancient invocation. A gentle breeze stirred, weaving through the branches and carrying away the last clinging spores like dandelion fluff. The mist dissolved, and dappled sunlight warmed the newly healed grove. By dusk, Blackroot Grove stood reborn, tree trunks gleamed with fresh sap, ferns unfurled across the floor, and the stream chattered happily over smooth stones. Bryn knelt in gratitude, pressing his palm to the vibrant moss. Eloan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your care will keep this promise alive," she said. She stayed long enough to teach the wardens how to bless new saplings with tear water, warm roots with ember shards, ignite hope with orb light at dawn, and call the cleansing wind in times of need. When she departed at first light, Bryn handed her a tender sapling from the oldest oak, a living emblem of their shared covenant. With the grove's renewal humming in her satchel beside the orb, the ember's brazier now empty but full of potential, the flask of tear water, and the wind token, Eloan set her sights on the next horizon, High Spire Summit, where an eternal storm awaited her final trial. The mountain's jagged peaks pierced mist-laden skies, promising a test of courage and balance at the very heights of the world. The road to High Spire Summit was not so much a path as a climb, an ever-steepening ascent carved into the bones of the world. Eloan left behind the renewed forest of Blackroot Grove as dawn bathed the cliffs in pale hues of rose and silver. Her satchel, now carrying the orb, the tear, the ember's vessel, the wind's token, and the oak sapling gifted by Bryn, swayed gently with each careful step. The forest's hush faded with the altitude. The wind turned sharper, colder, but also clearer, its howls no longer corrupted by rot or ruin. Up here, the world was raw and true. She paused at the edge of a wide outcrop known as Whispering Crag. The villagers below believed this cliff held echoes of every soul who had attempted the summit before. Indeed, as she placed her hand against the stone, she heard faint murmurs, some hopeful, others broken with fatigue or fear. She whispered a promise to the wind, I climb not just for myself, but for all those who dare to rise. Beyond the crag, the sky darkened. Stormy clouds hung thick over High Spire's peak, their underbellies flashing with lightning. The wind howled in protest, but Eloan pressed on, boots crunching through ice-flecked gravel. Snow began to fall, not gentle flakes, but sharp, whirling darts that sliced through the air with a will of their own. Her cloak whipped behind her, and the cold gnawed at her fingers, yet the orb at her chest pulsed in steady rhythm, a reminder of spring's breath even amid winter's fury. By mid-climb, she reached the old sky shrine, an open ring of stone columns known as the Circle of Echoes. Here, the trial of balance awaited. A narrow rope bridge spanned a deep chasm, its planks swaying violently in the storm winds. Beneath, only mist and the suggestion of jagged rock. A figure waited at the near side of the bridge, cloaked in feathers of crow and snow owl, their face hidden beneath a silver mask carved like a stormy cloud. The Windward Warden. None crossed the skybridge without proving the harmony of all elements within, the Warden intoned, voice like distant thunder. The flame must not consume. The water must not drown. The wind must not scatter. The light must not blind. Step forward only if you carry balance. Eloan bowed her head and reached into her satchel. One by one, she called forth the four essences, the shard of ember now faint but glowing warm, the drop of the tear of clarity, the silver wind token, and the awakening orb. She held them in her open palms and whispered, I do not command them, I carry them. And they carry me. The storm hesitated. Then the Warden stepped aside. Eloan placed the orb against her chest, tucked the token behind her ear, and stepped onto the first swaying plank. The wind pushed. She bent her knees and moved with it. Snow blinded. She closed her eyes and trusted the rhythm of her breath. Lightning flashed. She let the thunder pass through her, like a wave. Halfway across, a gale stronger than all before surged forward. Her balance teetered. The wind tried to rip her from the bridge, but she didn't resist. Instead, she pulled the wind token from behind her ear and held it aloft. You are not here to break me, she whispered, you are here to test me. The wind curled around her like a great bird, wings flaring, and then lifted. Not to throw her but to carry. She stepped onto the far platform, steady and breathless. The Warden reappeared before her, no longer veiled, their face ageless and lined with sun, frost, and sky. You are the harmony we have waited for. Behind them, the storm parted like a curtain, revealing a plateau ringed with ancient monoliths carved in spirals, flames, and raindrop glyphs. At the center was a pedestal of obsidian and sky glass. Eloan approached, and upon the pedestal she placed the four gifts, orb, tear, ember vessel, and wind token. The pedestal began to hum. Light flared from the monolith's first gold, then blue, then red, then silver, and joined into a beam that shot into the clouds above. The storm shattered. The sky opened. And for the first time in generations, sunlight bathed the summit of High Spire. The warden knelt. You have reunited the breath of spring with the heights of the world. The crown of renewal is yours to carry, not as ruler, but as guardian. The beam faded, but something remained in its place, a circlet of braided vines, inlaid with a single crystal that held the essence of all four elements. Eloan took the crown, not to wear but to protect. From the summit, she could see every land she had touched, Windvale's blooming meadows, Sunvale's golden fields, Blackroot's healing canopy. But she also saw lands still in shadow, coastlines cloaked in storm, deserts cracked by grief, cities walled in fear. Her journey was far from over. With the crown of renewal held in her arms and the storm at her back, Eloan descended the path, her heart a steady drum of light, wind, flame, and water. The world below stirred and waited. The path from High Spire summit wound like a silver thread down through mist-swept cliffs, across stone terraces laced with thawing ice, and into the deep valleys below. Eloan's footsteps were slow but steady, her senses alive with a new awareness. Though her trials were complete, her journey was far from finished. In her satchel rested the four sacred relics: light, flame, water, and wind, and now, nestled among them, the crown of renewal, pulsing with quiet, elemental power. She descended through thinning clouds as morning light spilled over the ridges, casting long golden beams across the world. Birds wheeled overhead, riding air newly freed from storm. The wind, once wild and defiant, now seemed to follow her with a reverent hush, stirring her cloak gently, as if bowing to the guardian it had tested and accepted. By noon, she reached the edge of Whispering Vale, a quiet land cradled between forest and field. It was a place she had passed briefly long ago, before her name had been whispered by winds and sung by rivers. Back then, it had been a peaceful refuge of artists and dreamers. But now, a stillness hung over it that was not peace, but stagnation. Crops lay wilted in narrow fields, though the soil was not dry. Fountains no longer bubbled in the village square, though water was not scarce. The people moved like sleepwalkers, heads low, eyes dim, their voices hushed as though afraid to disturb some unseen presence. Eloan passed unnoticed through the edge of town, until a young child tugged on her cloak. The girl, no older than 8, stared up with wide eyes. "Are you the one the river dreams about?" she asked. "The one who makes the world bloom." Eloan knelt and brushed a curl from the girl's cheek. "I don't make the world bloom," she said gently. "I reminded how." The child took her hand and led her into the village proper. Slowly, more people emerged, drawn by her presence, or perhaps by the quiet hum of the crown of renewal. Their faces were wary, some skeptical, others merely tired. Eloan turned to them and spoke, her voice clear and strong. "I have walked through forest and flame, wind and storm, silence and sorrow. And I tell you now, life waits not at the end of hardship, but in the rising from it. You have not been forgotten. You have only forgotten yourselves." She removed the crown from her satchel and held it aloft. At once, the air shifted. A breeze stirred the long dormant wind chimes that lined the eaves. A single flame sparked in the forge, unbidden but gentle. Rain began to fall not from the sky, but from the branches of the old ash tree in the square, its bark weeping shimmering droplets like tears of joy. And from beneath the villagers' feet, tiny white crocuses burst through cobblestones, blooming where there had only been stone and memory. The people fell still. Then one by one, they began to move. A gardener dropped to her knees and began clearing weeds from a long-neglected planter. A potter lifted his wheel for the first time in years, while an elder brought out a dulcimer and began to tune it with trembling fingers. The stillness broke not into noise, but into life. Eloan moved through the village, blessing hearths and wells, lighting candles with a touch, whispering over seeds so they germinated before astonished eyes. She placed a flame-glow ember in the heart of the blacksmith's cold forge, returned a splash of tear water to the village bathhouse, and planted the oak sapling from blackroot in the center of the square. But she did not stay long. By the following dawn, the village had already begun to rebuild not just their homes, but their sense of wonder. The children ran through fields chasing wind sprites. Elders began passing down the stories they had once guarded in silence. The river once choked with stillness now laughed again as it curved around mossy stones. Standing at the threshold of the vale, Eloan turned back for one last look. The village had changed, but more importantly, it could change. That, she now knew, was the true magic of renewal, not transformation by power, but by remembrance. The land and its people had only needed a spark, a whisper, a mirror. And she would continue on. South lay a crumbled coast shrouded in sea fog. East, a desert of shifting glass dunes. North, ruins where forgotten languages still echoed through empty halls. Wherever hope flickered, wherever memory faded, Eloan would walk and carry the breath of seasons with her. She fastened the crown of renewal beneath her cloak, now not as a symbol of status, but as a reminder, spring is not something given, it is something grown. And with that, the guardian stepped once more into the wide, waiting world. Eloan journeyed westward now, across the patchwork plains where wild lavender bowed in the breeze, toward a forgotten coastline known as the Rul's Reach. Legends spoke of a harbor town once vibrant with song and trade, now swallowed by mist and silence. Ships no longer docked there. Fishermen vanished without storm. And the sea once sapphire blue now lay still, as if mourning something no one could name. The guardian of renewal arrived at dusk, her cloak damp from salt-laced fog, her boots leaving crisp imprints in the sand. The orb pulsed softly in her satchel, the crown of renewal secured beside it. In her hand, she carried the tear-shaped flask of sacred water. The air tasted not foul, but empty, like a song stopped mid-note. The remnants of the Rul's Reach emerged through the mist-barnacled docks, half-submerged rowboats, houses sealed like tombs. Wind chimes rusted into silence hung limp above shuttered windows. There were no birds. No voices. Only the steady hush of waves lapping with eerie rhythm. She passed a stone shrine near the pier, its statue crumbled and half-submerged. A single line remained etched in the mossy base. We turned from the tide, and so the tide turned from us. Eloan pressed her hand to the stone and whispered, "Then I come to turn it back." She made her way to the water's edge where the surf curled against blackened rocks. There, the mist thickened, rising like a living wall. She felt the presence then. Not malevolent, but wounded. Old pain. Longing. Regret. Suddenly, the mist coalesced into a figure. A woman of sea foam and wind, eyes like tida-pools and hair trailing into misty tendrils. Her form flickered between visibility and vapor. She spoke, not with sound, but with memory. They sang to me once. They danced. They cast lanterns into the waves and gave thanks for the bounty. Then they took without giving. Built stone walls. Turned harbors into prisons. Forgot the sea speaks. Eloan stepped forward, heart open. I remember for them. And I come to help them remember. From her satchel, she drew the tear of clarity and poured 3 drops into the tide. One for what was. One for what was lost. One for what could still be. The ocean stilled. Then, slowly, it shimmered, silver lines etching across the waves like stardust. The mist woman watched. Her expression shifted, no longer sorrowful, but curious. Eloan held out the awakening orb, and its light danced across the wet stones. She placed it at the shore's edge. Its glow mirrored in the waves. The sea shimmered. Then faint at first a note. Music. From beneath the water, a song rose. Not sung by lips, but by current and light and memory. Lanterns flickered to life in windows that had stayed dark for decades. Doors creaked open. A single gull cried overhead. The sea had begun to answer. Eloan moved through the ruins, rekindling hearths, and replanting beach grass in salt-hardened earth. She scattered ember dust in the storm-scarred boathouse, and its cracked beams drew upright again, as though remembering their strength. At the old market square, she called the wind not to blow away the past, but to carry songs once sung back to those who had forgotten how. And still, she listened. The sea was not yet healed. She returned to the shrine and planted the black root oak sapling beside it. Then she lifted the crown of renewal in both hands and placed it at the base. Let this place become a memory that grows. The sea responded. The fog receded. The water glistened. From deep within the bay, a light pulsed, a distant beacon long thought extinguished. And then, something broke the surface, the figure of a ship, spectral at first, but solidifying in the morning sun. The Lyra's Grace, a vessel lost 40 years ago, her hull intact and sails rising like the wings of seabirds. At her prow stood the mist woman, now solid, real, her expression radiant. She looked to Eloan and bowed. You have reminded the sea how to sing, she whispered. As dawn broke, fishermen returned to their boats. The harbor stirred. Nets were repaired, sails restitched. And on the pier, children danced to a tune the tide hummed through their bare feet. Eloin left without fanfare, walking the shoreline until the cliffs curved once more inland. She glanced back only once, to see gulls wheeling in the sky and sails rising along the bay like blossoms upon water. The sea had remembered. And now, so would its people. The journey continued. Rumors reached her of a desert where time itself had halted, where nothing aged, but nothing grew. A place known only as the Still. Eloin smiled. Let the wind carry her there next. Eloin journeyed inland, following a dry riverbed that once flowed from the Ural's coast but now lay brittle and cracked beneath the heat of a sky that never shifted. She entered a land spoken of only in uncertain whispers, a place known as the Still, where time itself was said to pause, and nothing changed, and nothing grew. It was not lifeless, only frozen. Suspended. Waiting. Her boots crunched over the powdery surface of a great salt flat. There were no winds here. No shifting dunes or sweeping mirages. Just endless, level plains of pale gold sand, smooth as parchment and just as blank. The horizon never seemed nearer, no matter how far she walked. Even the sun above her stood fixed in place, held in an eternal noon. But Eloin felt the distortion. Here, spring could not arrive, not because it had been pushed away, but because the world had forgotten how to move forward. And yet, she kept walking. Eventually, she came upon the first sign of life, a grove of petrified trees, their bark turned to white stone, frozen in poses of agony, branches twisting upward as though pleading to a sky that never answered. Beneath one such tree sat a lone figure cloaked in sand-colored robes, unmoving, yet very much alive. The figure turned its head slowly, as if each movement was weighed against centuries. You walk in a place where no wind blows, they rasped. What do you hope to change? Eloin sat before them, the crown of renewal tucked beneath her cloak. Not to change, she said. To remind. To restore the rhythm of time. The figure, whom she later learned was called Isrin, the watcher, studied her with eyes the color of dried river clay. Then step into the heart of the Still. If you can find its center, and still remember who you are, the land may awaken. Eloin stood, bowed, and continued onward. The deeper she went, the heavier the air grew. Not with heat but with stillness. Her own thoughts slowed. Her breath took effort. Colors faded from the world. Her heartbeat quieted. She lost track of how long she walked. Time didn't pass here. Shadows didn't move. But somewhere far within, she reached a great basin in the center of the Still, a depression in the earth so perfectly symmetrical that it felt carved by forgotten gods. At the basin's center stood a single, glass-like flower, crystal petals splayed open, yet covered in centuries of dust. Around it, the ground was so motionless that even Eloin's breath stirred nothing. She knew this was the moment. She drew the awakening orb and pressed it into the basin floor. Then the tear of clarity, she poured the final few drops into the roots of the crystalline bloom. She whispered, "Let the first breath be yours again." At first, nothing. Then, a flicker. A pulse beneath her boots. The ground ticked. Not cracked. Not quaked. Ticked. Like a clock remembering its purpose. The crystal flower shimmered. Dust lifted from its petals in slow spirals. The orb's golden light spread outward in concentric rings. The colors in the world began to return, slowly like paint rising from beneath a faded canvas. Then wind. The faintest breeze. Just one breath of air. But it was enough. Eloan fell to her knees as the ground beneath the basin trembled. The crystal bloom closed its petals slowly, and from it rose a faint hum like the chime of a distant bell. All around, the sand began to shift. In slow motion, dunes formed where there had been none. Shadows crept across the basin floor. Time had restarted. Eloan returned to the petrified grove where Isren waited, now standing beside a tree that had begun to pulse with color at its roots. "You've stirred what no one dared touch," he said, voice softer, alive. "The land remembers the will again." She nodded, exhausted but smiling. Spring must move. Even here. Before she left, she planted a sprout from the black root oak near the base of the basin. She used the last ember fragment to warm the seed, and whispered into the wind that now curled through the canyon walls, "Grow slow, but grow true." Then, guided by the rhythm of the ticking earth beneath her, Eloan turned eastward. Beyond the still, beyond the plains and rivers, lay the spires of Sariadra, a city of scholars turned to stone, whose towers had forgotten their names. Another memory to restore. Another heartbeat to awaken. The guardian of renewal pressed onward, and behind her, time began to walk once more. East of the reawakened still, Eloan entered the forgotten realm of Sariadra, a city once revered for its knowledge, now entombed in silence and stone. The road twisted through dry ravines and hollowed valleys before opening to a vast marble plain where towers reached skyward like fingers grasping for vanished stars. But they did not move. They did not speak. They were petrified. Eloan paused at the edge of the city's outermost gate. Its arch bore an inscription carved in a language that shimmered faintly, runes not truly lost, but waiting to be read. She passed beneath the gate, and silence swallowed her. There were no birds here. No wind. The towers did not echo. Buildings remained intact, beautiful even frozen mid-moment, cloaks fluttering eternally in non-existent breezes, pages mid-turn, quills poised above books on desks. The people of Sariadra were statues now, captured in graceful gestures, like dancers caught at the peak of motion. But unlike the still where time had simply paused, here, time had calcified. She wandered the central plaza, where a grand library rose like a palace. Its doors were open, yet unmoving, and inside, the shelves were lined with tomes that had turned to stone. Even the candle flames had hardened into spirals of pale quartz. On a central pedestal lay a book, its title chiseled into basalt. "Truths Too Heavy to Bear," Eloan reached out, but the moment her fingers brushed the stone page, the silence spoke. A voice, ancient and weary, filled the chamber not with volume, but with weight. They asked for knowledge without feeling, wisdom without humility. They built towers, but buried roots. And when the truth came, they chose to forget. She withdrew her hand. The voice continued, now softer. You, who carry memory, will you remind us of what we could not face? Eloan bowed her head. I will. From her satchel, she brought forth the tear of clarity, its last droplet clinging to the bottom of the flask. She held it above the pedestal and let it fall upon the stone book. It did not dissolve. It sank. The stone darkened, then cracked not with violence, but with sorrow. A single page turned. On it, a word emerged in glowing ink, forgive. Eloan closed her eyes, and placed the crown of renewal upon the pedestal beside the tome. The orb at her side flared bright. Suddenly, the library trembled not with collapse, but with breath. Books softened into parchment. Flame spirals unfurled and flickered to life. Dust fell from shelves like snow. Eloan stepped outside and found that the plaza had shifted. Statues now blinked. Some still remained still, but others stirred, blinking at a world they had long forgotten how to see. An elder near the fountain, a woman with eyes like granite, turned her gaze to Eloan. We dreamed we had all the answers, she whispered. But it was the questions we abandoned that turned us to stone. Eloan touched her shoulder. Then ask them again. Throughout the day, she moved from tower to tower, reawakening memory. In the music hall, she laid the wind token upon a stone flute. Its melody returned to the air like a sigh. In the old observatory, she used the embers' warmth to melt frost from glass lenses pointed at forgotten constellations. And in the archives, she opened a sealed scroll chamber with light from the awakening orb, illuminating names, stories, and truths that had been locked away for generations. As twilight fell, the city glowed not with torchlight, but with shared remembrance. The people gathered in the plaza to hear one another speak again. Laughter returned. So did tears. Before departing, Eloan met the elder again. We called ourselves the minds of the realm, the woman said, but it was the heart we left behind. You carry both. You are not just a guardian now. You are a keeper. Eloan accepted the title with a quiet nod. But in truth, she felt like something else entirely, something both more ancient and more newborn. A thread in a tapestry not yet complete. As she left Sariadra, her satchel carried no more relics. The orb had dimmed, its light spent. The tear was empty. The ember cold. The wind token returned to the earth. And the crown of renewal, now resting in the library's heart, had become the city's new sigil, no longer a traveler's tool, but a shared promise. Yet Eloan did not feel depleted. She felt full. for the gifts she had carried had not been hers. They had only passed through her. And ahead, beyond the hills of remembrance, lay the border of a realm few dared cross. The hollowed threshold where dreams went to die or be reborn. Eloan did not hesitate. She walked forward, as the wind began to rise again behind her, carrying with it the songs of forests, flames, tides, and towers renewed. Eloan's path curved into shadow. Beyond the fertile fields and reawakened cities, she now stood at the edge of a land known only as the hollowed threshold, a place whispered of in broken lullabies and half-remembered dreams. Here, the very air seemed to hum with forgotten purpose. It was a realm not of death, but of unbecoming, where memories untethered drifted like smoke, and identities that had once burned bright flickered out in silence. No maps led here. No roads returned. She crossed beneath a black arch of stone that seemed to have formed naturally, yet bore etchings that shifted when one looked too long, names, faces, and prayers, all eroded by time, wind, and the weariness of being forgotten. Her boots pressed into ash-soft soil. The grass here was pale silver, and the trees, if they could be called such, stood tall without leaves, their bark smooth as bone and hollow as the name suggested. It was not a dead place. It was a waiting place. Eloan did not fear it, but she felt it. In her chest. In her bones. In the weight of every step. The crown of renewal was no longer at her side, left behind in Sariadra as a gift to the minds that had remembered their hearts. The orb had faded after the sea sang once more. The ember and tear had fulfilled their purpose in flame and clarity. She had given all. And yet here she was. What remained in her satchel were memories. Letters from villagers in Windvale. A folded seed pouch from Bryn of Blackroot. A stone flute gifted by a child at Thurl's Reach. A map redrawn by a newly awakened scribe in Sariadra. Symbols of places restored. Symbols of people remembered. She pressed onward until the world shifted around her, not through terrain, but through silence. A field opened wide ahead, flat as glass, yet it shimmered like water. At its center rose a solitary mirror, tall as a tree and framed in black wood, rooted in the earth like a monument. Its surface did not reflect her image, only what was behind her: her journey, her steps, her choices. Eloan approached and stopped a breath away. A voice not from the mirror, but from within her whispered, "What remains when all gifts are given?" She did not speak aloud, but her answer was firm: the giver. What walks when every path ends? The one who remembers why she began. The mirror shimmered. And for the first time, it reflected her, not her face, but her essence. In the glass, she saw every moment lived, from the first morning in Windvale when the breeze danced with birdsong, to the trembling ascent of High Spire summit, from the sorrow of petrified towers to the laughter of reborn villages. And behind all of it, not just the world, but herself growing. She stepped forward. And the mirror rippled. She did not crash through. She did not vanish. She passed through like light crossing still water. On the other side was not a new land, but the core of all lands, a place woven from the threads of every realm she had touched. Forests shimmered with sea spray. Mountains echoed with lullabies. Deserts breathed with wind. And time flowed in every direction like a river unconstrained. Here, Eloan found herself at the foot of an ancient tree, not blackroot, not the great oak, not even metaphor. This tree bore no leaves, no fruit, no shadow. It simply was. The tree of return. Its bark shimmered in colors unnamed. Its roots stretched through every path she had walked. Its branches carried the voices of every being who had ever hoped. At its base sat a small object. She knelt. It was a seed. No larger than a pebble. Warm to the touch. As she held it in her hand, the tree spoke not in words, but in feeling. This was not the end. This was the origin. You have sown healing, and in turn, have been healed. You carried the seasons to those who had forgotten spring. Now carry this seed, not to plant in soil but in story. She understood then. This seed was legacy. It would not bloom from earth but from voice, memory, telling. She stood once more, and for the first time, she felt no weight on her back. Her burden had become purpose. Her path woven into others. She was not a savior, not a chosen. She was a reminder that things lost could be found again, that what sleeps may waken, that what ends can begin anew. She turned from the tree of return, cradling the seed close, and stepped into the wind. A road unfolded not to another dying land, not to another broken city but to home. Back to Windvale. Not because the journey was over but because it was time to share it. As she walked, the seed in her hand pulsed like a heartbeat, and behind her, the hollowed threshold faded not into darkness, but into light. A place no longer waiting. A place now remembered. And Eloan, guardian and keeper, walked on her story still unfolding, one breath, one step, one story at a time. When Eloan crossed the threshold of wind and light, she did not arrive back in Windvale immediately. The road, if it could still be called that, led her through winding hills stitched with fog and fields that flickered between seasons. One moment, the grass beneath her feet glistened with frost, the next, it shimmered in summer gold. The world had not yet settled. She walked for what felt like both hours and days. Then, as twilight folded over the land like a warm shawl, she saw the familiar lanterns of Windvale flickering in the distance, soft, golden orbs swaying from their hooks in curved iron posts. The scent of rosemary, firewood, and fresh loam reached her before the first house came into view. But something was different. Windvale hadn't just changed, it had remembered. Stone walls that once bore ivy and moss now bloomed with flowering vines of twilight blue and warm orange. The central square had become a mosaic garden of memory, paved with colorful tiles engraved with dates, names, and tiny symbols: harps, suns, feathers, waves. At the center stood a new monument, not a statue, but a living tree. It was the oak sapling she had once planted near the heart of Blackroot. Only now, it had grown. Its trunk, silver-veined and supple, stretched high above the square, branches laced with tiny wind chimes and bird houses carved by village children. Nestled among the roots were offerings, smooth river stones etched with poems, half-burnt candles, tear-shaped vials filled with colored rainwater. They had remembered her. Not as myth, not as legend, but as Eloan. And not only her, but the journey. She walked through town not as a stranger, nor as a returning hero, but as someone who belonged. An elder in a moss-green shawl reached for her hand with a smile. "The orchard's singing again," she said. "Just yesterday, the apples returned." A blacksmith's son bowed, then laughed awkwardly. "The forge lit itself this morning. My father says it was your ember. He never stops talking about it." From a balcony, a pair of musicians played a soft, four-note tune. The song from the Vault of Winds. Eloan paused by the well she'd once blessed, now surrounded by smooth river pebbles and garlands of mint. The water shimmered, still infused with the tear's clarity. She touched the rim, and the well gave a tiny ripple of acknowledgement like an old friend nodding hello. Then the children came. One by one, they approached her not with awe, but with questions. "Did you really speak to the storm? Was the sea queen real? What did the desert feel like? Did the wind talk to you? Can we do what you did?" She knelt to meet them at eye level and smiled. "Yes," she said. "And yes," the sea queen cried. "The desert was quiet. The wind always talks, you just have to slow down enough to hear it. And yes, you can. You must." From her satchel, she pulled the seed she had been given in the hollowed threshold. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat in her palm. The children stared wide-eyed, drawn to it as if it sang a note only they could hear. "I brought this back," she said, "but I cannot plant it alone." Without hesitation, they formed a circle in the garden plaza. The villagers watched silently, reverently, as the children dug a shallow bed with their fingers, no tools, just hands and heart. Eloan placed the seed into the earth. As they covered it, the last light of day kissed the soil. Nothing happened at first. Then a single green shoot rose from the soil, impossibly fast, like breath inhaled after deep stillness. A blossom unfurled. It was not one color, it was every color. And none. Its petals shimmered with memory and promise. It was not a flower meant to be touched, but remembered. It changed as each person looked upon it. Some saw a mother's lullaby, others a sunlit stream, others a lost sibling's laugh. It was not just a flower. It was story. It was the garden of the path. And the garden was just beginning. That night, the villagers held a quiet feast beneath the tree. Bread was broken. Lanterns lit. Songs shared. Eloan did not sit at the head of the table. She moved among them, laughing, listening, dancing briefly with children, and singing once with the blind weaver who remembered every note of the lullaby from the Roll's Reach. Later, when the sky had settled into starlight, she walked alone to the hill where her cottage once stood. To her surprise, it remained though vines curled warmly along its edges, and a cat she didn't recognize now dozed on the windowsill. Inside, she lit a candle, placed her satchel gently by the door, and unrolled the worn map of her journey across the world. It no longer showed only roads and rivers, but glowing marks where life had returned. Windvale, Sunvale, Blackroot, Highspire, the Roll's Reach, the Still, Seriadra, the Hollowed Threshold, all shining, all connected. She took the stone flute from the satchel and played a single note. Soft, steady. Outside, the wind picked up. Not to carry her away, but to carry her words. Because her journey now would not be one of walking, but of telling. And as the candle flickered beside her and the wind slipped between the shutters, 1,000 stories stirred in the dark. She would tell them. And so, under a quilt of stars, with her satchel finally at rest and her heart full of places, Eloan leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and began again. Spring returned to Windvale not with a sudden burst of color, but like a melody rediscovered familiar, but sweeter now that it had nearly been lost. It flowed through the village in soft gestures, a robin building its nest beneath a windowsill, bees humming over rain-wet petals, the laughter of children echoing through the narrow stone lanes. And in the heart of it all stood Eloan, not apart, not above, but among. She had not come back as a figure of legend or miracle, but as someone who had carried the memory of hope and returned it to its source. Weeks had passed since the planting of the threshold blossom, as villagers called it, the memory flower born from the seed of renewal. It had not wilted, nor had it spread in any natural way. Instead, it continued to transform. Each day it bloomed anew in a different color, and no two villagers ever saw it the same. To the baker, it shimmered like rising steam over warm bread. To the healer, it pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. To the child who had never met his grandmother, it glowed like the lantern she once carried. And so the villagers decided spontaneously, as all meaningful traditions begin, that the first full moon of spring would be marked by a new celebration, the festival of the first bloom. Eloan did not organize it. She didn't need to. On the eve of the festival, she stood on the balcony of her quiet cottage, overlooking the village square. Lanterns woven from reeds and dyed in every imaginable hue swayed from archways and rooftops. Tables lined the walkways, each draped in embroidered cloth and piled high with harvest from the revitalized gardens. Music drifted upward, an ever-changing harmony of fiddles, flutes, and voices humming songs remembered from old stories and dreams. She smiled to see the 3 orphaned brothers from the Sunvale Valley teaching others how to roast their special root cakes, now golden and crisp. Bryn of Blackroot had arrived days earlier and was already deep in conversation with Cereadran scribes, sharing tales of fungi and living trees. An old sailor from the Rill's Reach recited sea ballads that turned mist to mistletoe in the minds of the young. And even Isrin, the watcher from the still, sat quietly beneath a vine-draped pergola, listening with a calm patience to every question the children dared ask. At the center of the square stood the bloom. It had opened wider than ever before. Tonight, it glowed not with mystery, but recognition. Its petals shimmered with traces of every place Eloan had walked. Wind, flame, water, stone. A soft gust passed through its center like breath, and when it did, the villagers felt something stir. Not just awe, but belonging. Eloan descended into the square without fanfare, her shawl wrapped loose over her shoulders. As she passed, children handed her sprigs of mint and thyme, tiny pebbles with painted runes, and fragments of woven string offerings, not to her, but to what she stood for. She accepted them all with a quiet grace and placed them gently into a shallow bowl near the roots of the bloom. The ceremony that followed was not written. It wasn't scripted. It simply happened. One by one, villagers stepped forward to share a memory not of magic, not of Eloan's journey, but of their own rediscoveries. A woman who had stopped singing after her husband passed now led the first verse of a lullaby she used to hum in the garden. A boy who had once hidden from others spoke aloud of how he had found the courage to gather seeds from the orchard and plant them where the old wall had crumbled. An elder recounted the first time in decades she had walked barefoot through the morning dew and felt joy rather than fear. These were not grand stories, but they were real. Eloan watched, her heart swelling not because she had caused these moments, but because she had witnessed them. That had always been her truest role. Not a wielder of power, but a bearer of permission, giving others the space to remember who they were before they forgot. When the final story was told, silence fell again, not empty, but full. Then a child, no older than 5, stood before the bloom. Without a word, she reached out and pressed her palm gently to a petal. The flower quivered and sang. Not in words, not even in sound, but in feeling. A warmth spread outward, gentle and sure, as if every soul present had been wrapped in the first sunrise of their lives. Old grief softened. Forgotten names returned to tongues. The pain of long seasons faded, not erased, but honored. The bloom did not change color that night. It turned clear, reflecting everyone gathered. Not as they were, but as they truly were. And then, quietly, the petals closed. Not as an ending, but as a rest. The crowd did not cheer. They simply breathed together. The festival became dance, and the dance became laughter, and the laughter became sleep. And before long, the square emptied, lanterns swinging softly in the wind. Eloan sat alone beside the bloom, now nestled in gentle starlight. She did not speak. She only listened. And the world, in return, whispered back. You have walked far. You have returned what was broken. You have sown memory. Now let it grow. From her pouch, she removed the map once more. It had changed. The borders of the realms had softened. New names appeared beside old ones. Forests now bore pathways once invisible. Rivers had joined. Distant lands once marked as lost were now inked in gold. She traced a finger along a new road, one that led not outward, but inward. A final journey. Not to fix. Not to awaken. But to finally rest. And to pass the seed onward. To the next. Because spring never truly ends. It only begins again. Eloan awoke just before dawn. The cottage was hushed, wrapped in the pale blue silence that only exists in the moments before the world takes its first breath. Through the open window, she could hear the last notes of the nighttime chorus, the owl's parting call, the rustle of foxes settling into their dens, the final sigh of wind over the thatched roofs of Windvale. And beneath it all, barely audible, the heartbeat of the land. It was different now. Not louder, not fainter, but deeper. More certain. The land had memory again. She rose slowly, her limbs weighted not with fatigue but with gravity, the gravity of completion. Of knowing she had walked the long arc of renewal and returned not just with gifts, but with understanding. She stood before the mirror carved from driftwood and mountain stone, its frame a collage of her journey, a feather from the vault, a seashell from the rill, a leaf from blackroot, a sliver of sun. Crystal from the still. Each was a token. A thread in the tapestry she had become. But today was not for collecting more. Today was for leaving something behind. She wrapped herself in her old traveling cloak, not the ceremonial one from Highspire or the blessed robe she'd worn through the hollowed threshold, but the original one. The first. Soft and frayed at the seams. It smelled of moss and ash and lavender. She fastened the clasp and reached for her satchel. Empty now. No orb. No ember. No sacred tear. No token of wind. Only the seed pouch stitched with names from every village she'd touched. And tucked into the fold, a small bundle wrapped in silken cloth. The keeper's light. It had come to her after the festival. Not from the bloom, nor from the tree of return, but from within. A flame that did not burn, a glow that did not fade. When she had closed her eyes beneath the stars that night, she'd felt it spark just beneath her ribs, gentle, enduring, not a fire to carry, but a warmth to share. She stepped into the morning. Windvale was still asleep, but not silent. In the distance, a farmer whispered blessings to newly planted barley. A midwife hummed as she prepared clean linens for a birth expected at sunset. Somewhere, a flute played the melody of wind crossing mountain tops, slow, reverent, patient. She made her way through the village without fanfare, though more than a few saw her and offered a quiet nod. They knew. Not that she was leaving, but that something was shifting. Beyond the village, at the edge of the valley where the cliffs met the clouds, Eloan climbed the stone steps to the old watchtower. It had once been used by sentries during storms, long before the world grew still. Now, it served as something else entirely, a place of stories, of remembering. Children often came here to listen to the elders speak of when the sea had sung, when the trees had wept, when the wind had learned to laugh again. Today, it would become something more. She reached the top and found a fire pit built from river stones and rimmed with herbs that had been arranged in careful rings: rosemary for memory, sage for clarity, mint for courage. In the center, dry kindling lay waiting. Not for warmth, but for meaning. Eloan knelt. She placed the silken bundle in the center, unwrapped it, and revealed the keeper's light, a crystal no larger than a pearl, glowing from within with soft, golden blue radiance. It pulsed once, twice, then steadied. She whispered a word, not in any known tongue, but in the language of wind and root and water and hearth. The crystal flared, and the kindling caught flame, no smoke, only light. It rose slowly, dancing in hues that shifted like the seasons: green for spring, gold for summer, rust red for fall, soft blue for winter, and then green again. When it steadied, Eloan stood and stepped back. And there it remained, the flame of the keeper. Not to be worshipped, not to be guarded, but to be witnessed. Within hours, word spread through Windvale. By noon, they gathered one by one, then in pairs, then in crowds. They climbed the tower steps not with awe, but with quiet need. Each person approached the flame and stood before it, letting it shine through them. Some wept. Some sang. Some said nothing, but left a ribbon, a stone, a drawing, a name. And the flame held them all. That evening, as stars returned to their rightful constellations and fireflies lit the riverbanks like drifting candles, Eloan sat by the watchtower's base. She did not climb again. She did not speak. Because her work was no longer to lead. It was to step back. To let the story live beyond her. That night, as villagers passed the flame from hand to hand using lanterns shaped like leaves and shells, they sang a new song, not one of heroes or trials or even magic, but of continuing. Of what comes after the last page. Of what we do with the light we're given. And Eloan. She smiled. For she knew the truth at last. Spring was not a gift she had carried. It was a language. And now they could speak it. As dawn approached, she stood once more and looked toward the horizon. Beyond it, valleys and forests still whispered. She would walk again, perhaps. Not to awaken. Not to renew. But simply to listen. Because even the keeper needs reminding. And stories never truly end. They only rest until someone needs them again. The morning after the keeper's flame was lit, Windvale awoke with a quiet energy humming through its soil. It wasn't the frantic rush of a celebration or the heaviness of an ending. It was something else, something subtle, yet undeniably alive. A continuation. Bread rose in hearts. Children traced the shape of petals from the bloom onto clay tiles. The weaver's loom whispered steadily again, and in the orchard, a robin sang a tune that hadn't been heard since Eloan was a child. Eloan stood on the southern ridge, looking out over the valley. She carried no satchel now, no tokens, no flame or feather or flask. What she carried was within. And what she sought, well, she didn't know yet. But something called her. Not with urgency, but with invitation. The villagers had not asked her to stay. They had trusted her to go. And that, she thought, was the final measure of a journey well walked, not in how it ends, but in how it frees others to begin. She stepped off the path well worn by boots and cartwheels, choosing instead the trail that curled along the forest's edge, a place she had only glimpsed before but never entered. Known as the Lanternwood, the forest had once been feared by villagers who believed it trapped wanderers in looping paths and strange dreams. But now, with the world changed, Eloan knew fear was only memory unlived. So she brought no fear with her. Only story. As she walked, the trees thickened, their trunks tall and twisted, their leaves glimmering with the faintest shimmer of silver dew even though the sun was high. Here and there, hanging from low branches, were lanterns not placed by human hand, but grown from the trees themselves. Each glowed with a warm, pulsing light, like a heartbeat made visible. Eloan paused beneath the first lantern. It pulsed once. A vision flashed across her mind, a little boy clutching a ribbon near the keeper's flame, whispering a name he couldn't quite remember. The lantern held it, remembered it, cradled it. These were not lanterns of fire. They were memories. She walked on. Each lantern she passed lit as she approached and dimmed as she moved beyond, leaving no path forward or back, only presence. At the forest's heart, she found a glade carpeted in moss and soft petals. A stream cut through it, gentle and clear. And in its center stood a low stone arch, half swallowed by ivy. It bore no carvings. No runes. No sigils. Only silence. And yet, Eloan understood. This was not a gate to another place, it was a threshold to understanding. She knelt and placed both palms on the mossy earth. It was time. Time not to carry the story forward, but to offer it back. She began to speak not aloud, but in meaning. She spoke of Windvale, where light returned to wells and songs filled hearts. Of Sunvale Downs, where earth split and healed, and root cakes were baked with love. Of Blackroot Grove, where rot gave way to green, and the whisper of trees returned. Of High Spire Summit, where wind met fire, and she had learned to bend but not break. Of the Rill's Reach, where the sea sang again. Of the still, where time had moved once more. Of Sariadra, where minds remembered hearts. And of the hollowed threshold, where she had found not power, but permission to rest. Each memory became a flicker of light, drifting from her chest into the air above the arch. Each flicker joined the lanterns overhead, growing brighter with every truth named. And then, from the stream, a voice rose not of man or woman, but of the land itself. You have carried the season. Now let it carry you. The arch shimmered. Eloan stood. The moss shifted beneath her feet, rising in tiny patterned spirals, leaves, wings. The stream curved toward her like a path. And just ahead, in a tree no taller than herself, a new lantern bloomed. Inside its glass, she saw herself. Not as a heroine. Not as a myth. As a moment. A flicker in the great constellation of all those who had walked, loved, lost, fallen, and risen again. She reached for the lantern. The instant her fingers touched it, warmth rushed through her, not heat, but recognition. She had become a lantern herself. A memory held in kindness. A light passed from voice to voice, fire to fire. She did not take the lantern with her. She left it there. Then, with a final glance at the blooming glade and the arch of silent stone, she turned back. The lanterns did not flicker out. They multiplied. All along the path, more lights appeared, soft, golden, steady. Some large, some small. All born from the sharing of story. When Eloan emerged from the forest that evening, villagers were gathered on the ridge. They did not rush to her. They only smiled, as though they had known she would return, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She joined them in silence. Together, they watched as the lanternwood shimmered in the dark, a galaxy of memory glowing gently in the distance. And then, without a word, a young girl stepped forward. She carried a notebook in one hand and a charcoal stick in the other. Eloan, she said shyly. Can I tell the next part of the story? Eloan smiled. And sat beside her. The others formed a circle. And the girl began. Because it had never been about Eloan's journey alone. It had always been about how we carry each other's light forward, one voice, one breath, one bloom at a time. And now, the keeper listened. The lanterns watched. And the story, ever growing, ever glowing, continued. Days passed in Windvale, gentle as the breath between seasons. Spring deepened into its full self, no longer the shy first blush of color, but a full chorus of light and leaf. The orchard wore its blossoms like garlands, and vines curled across fences and rooftops, bearing fruit more quickly than any could explain. Chickens wandered freely through the cobbled lanes, and the baker's daughter tied dandelions to her apron each morning to keep the sun close. But while life flourished outwardly, something quieter stirred beneath. A feeling that change, true change, was coming again. Not the kind that burns or breaks, but the kind that hands the torch to another hand. Eloan felt it in her bones. She had stayed in Windvale longer than she ever thought she would, long enough for her name to no longer be spoken in whispers, but in the same breath as rain and harvest and bedtime stories. The children no longer stared when she entered the square. They tugged on her sleeves, asked her to fix laces or listen to dreams. She had become not the keeper of legends, but the gardener of daily light. Yet as the bloom at the heart of the village matured, its nature began to change. It no longer opened each morning in a different color. Instead, it began to shed petals. One by one. Slowly. Gently. Each petal drifted downward like a feather, and wherever it landed, on a doorstep, a child's hand, an empty bowl, something awakened. A lost memory returned. A broken friendship mended. A forgotten tune hummed once more. The petals did not die. They planted themselves. The villagers soon realized the truth: the bloom was not fading. It was seeding. And Eloan, standing before it one morning, understood. It was time. Time for her to step back, not just from the path, but from the center. To give the story away. That afternoon, she gathered a small group by the bloom, those who had walked beside her, listened closely, asked the right questions. Not all were elders. Some were barely older than the children they now taught. Bryn from Blackroot was there, his cloak smelling faintly of cedar and soil. Esrin of the Still, quieter than ever, yet fully present. The former scribe of Sariadra, whose ink-stained fingers now planted mint in every alleyway. And the girl with the charcoal and notebook, the one who had asked, weeks ago, if she could tell the next part of the story. She was to be the first. Eloan stood before them, her hands empty, her heart full. "I've walked many miles," she began, "but no further than you will. I carried memory, light, and the whispers of old seasons. But none of it was mine to keep. Only mine to pass on." She placed a single petal, a translucent curl of shimmer and warmth, into the girl's hand. "This is not a relic," she said. "It is a beginning." Then, to the rest. Windvale doesn't need a guardian anymore. It needs many. Not to save, but to remind. Not to carry alone, but to walk together. They nodded. No applause. No ceremony. Just a yes that echoed in their bones. That night, beneath the glow of the keeper's flame, stories were not told by Eloan. They were told about her, but by others. How she once sang to the sea. How she lit a fire without spark. How she taught the wind to speak again. And Eloan. She sat at the edge of the crowd, wrapped in her old cloak, sipping broth from a carved wooden bowl, and listening not with nostalgia, but with peace. The story was no longer hers. It belonged to the village now. To the world. To anyone who needed it. And just before dawn, She packed lightly a water skin, a loaf of rosemary bread, a small flute carved from a cereodran reed, and slipped quietly from her cottage. The bloom watched her leave, as did the girl, already awake, writing a new page in her journal. The keeper left today. She left no map, no monument. Only a path where petals fall. Eloan walked west this time, not to find, but to follow. The lanterns of the forest faded behind her. The mountain peaks of Highspire disappeared beyond the clouds. She crossed a narrow wooden bridge over a river that had not flowed in 100 years until she walked past it once before. And somewhere, far ahead, she saw the silhouette of another child waiting beneath a tree. Maybe a village untouched. Maybe a bloom not yet planted. Or maybe, just maybe, a place where someone else was ready to remember. And so Eloan walked on. Not as a legend. Not as a guide. But as a whisper. A seed. A story already being told in someone else's voice. The western trail led Eloan through meadows brushed with gold, then into rolling hills where the grass grew taller than her waist. For 3 days she walked without destination, guided only by the feeling that something or someone was waiting. She carried no map, no plan, and yet, her steps never faltered. On the 4th day, just after a gentle rain, she reached a wide clearing tucked between two hills. There, beneath an ancient weeping willow, sat a child. She was perhaps 9 years old, with tangled dark hair, mud on her knees, and an expression that spoke of loss beyond her years. Around her, the earth was patchy and dry. The willow, once towering and full, now drooped like it carried the weight of forgotten seasons. Eloan said nothing at first. She simply sat beside the child. Minutes passed. Then the girl whispered, "It stopped blooming when Mama left." Eloan followed her gaze. A ring of once beautiful flowers circled the base of the willow, now wilted, their petals curled inward like held breath. The child looked at her with wary eyes. "Are you a witch?" Eloan chuckled softly. "Only on Tuesdays." The girl didn't smile, but she didn't run, either. "I'm Eloan." "I'm Miri." Silence again. Then Miri reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled, faded flower petal. It shimmered faintly, like those of the bloom. Eloan's breath caught. "Where did you find that?" "It flew on the wind," Miri said. "Landed in my soup last week. Tasted like memory." Eloan held out her hand. Miri hesitated, then placed the petal into her palm. It pulsed softly. Still alive. Still awake. Eloan placed the petal at the root of the willow. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and began to hum. Not a song of magic or power, but of home. A lullaby sung by countless mothers through the ages. A tune carried on rivers and woven into quilt stitches. Mary joined her, quietly at first. Then louder. Then laughing halfway through a note, tears on her cheeks, but not the sad kind. And beneath them, the soil stirred. Not in great earthquakes or brilliant flashes, but with a sigh. The flowers opened slowly, gently. The willow straightened. Its long green limbs fluttered in the breeze like arms opening for an embrace. The clearing filled with the scent of rain and renewal. Eloan did not speak. She only reached out and took Mary's hand. That night, the two of them built a fire. Mary cooked root vegetables while Eloan whittled a flute from a fallen branch. They spoke little. But when the stars came out, Mary crawled into Eloan's lap, and for the first time in many seasons, slept without nightmares. Before sunrise, Eloan woke. She kissed the girls for it, and left. By the time Mary opened her eyes, the clearing was quiet. But a single bloom from the willow had been left in her hand. Wrapped in its stem was a note, written in flowing ink. Plant this when someone else forgets how to hope. You're the keeper now. Episode 21, A Garden Where No Map Leads. Eloan's journey carried her farther west than even the old map makers had dared to draw. There were no borders here. No landmarks. No names. Just open sky and earth still dreaming of what it could become. She felt lighter with every step. As though she no longer walked on ground, but on the memory of footsteps her own, and those of every soul who had chosen kindness in the face of sorrow, compassion in the face of grief. One evening, as twilight stretched long across the hills, Eloan reached a knoll ringed with wind chimes made of stone and reed. They tinkled softly in the breeze, though no hand had hung them. In the center stood a circle of stones tall, weathered, ancient. Inside the circle grew a garden. It had no walls. No signs. No guardians. But every flower, every vine, every tree glowed faintly with something more than sunlight. It was a garden grown from stories. She stepped into the circle and knew instantly. This was where her path ended. And began again. She did not need to mark the spot. The land remembered. She knelt at the heart of the garden, where a single bare patch of earth waited. From her cloak, she drew the final petal, one she had kept not out of duty, but because it had never asked to be planted. Until now. She pressed it into the soil. No flame burst. No wind howled. Only a hush. And then color. The earth blossomed. Not in one flower, but in many. Hundreds. Thousands. Flowers in shapes no one had ever named. Colors that had no words. Each one shimmered with a memory. Of a hand held during grief. Of a song hummed by firelight. Of a lantern lit at the edge of forgetting. Eloan stood in the middle of it all, arms open to the sky. She smiled. And the wind answered. In every corner of the whirlwind vale, the downs, the grove, the summit, the reach, the still, the spires, people paused. They felt something pass over them. A warm, a whisper, a knowing. And somewhere far beyond, a little girl beneath a willow tree opened her notebook and began to write. Eloan walked farther than any map would go. But her footsteps are not lost. They bloom. The story ended. As all stories must. But the garden grows still. Title: The Guardian of Renewal, A Journey Through Seasons and Stories. Description: Join Eloan, the Guardian of Renewal, on an epic journey across mystical lands where seasons, elements, and forgotten memories intertwine. From the awakening forests and fiery trials to the silent shores and timeless deserts, Eloan carries the gifts of light, flame, water, and wind to restore life and hope to broken realms. Witness her transformation from a lone traveler to a beacon of remembrance as she passes the legacy of renewal to new generations. This enchanting tale weaves themes of resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of stories that connect us all. Perfect for fans of fantasy adventures filled with heart, mystery, and timeless magic.